This is Ampu. Welcome to Bhutan e-learning program. I'm Sipi Parajali from Mutithang Higher Secondary School. And today our lesson is for Key Stage 5 Biology. Okay. In order to introduce today's lesson, I'm going to show you a picture, and then by looking at the picture, you have to guess what's going to be our topic for today. So as you can see, the picture shows many neurons present, and there is conduction of impulse happening in each of these neurons. So what will be the topic of our lesson today? Yes, it is transmission of nerve impulse. So that is going to be our topic today. And before we directly move into the transmission of nerve impulse, first we have to learn a little bit about the organization of human nervous system as well as the structure of neuron. Okay, now let's proceed with our lesson. So the learning objectives for today's lesson are, towards the end of this lesson today, you may be able to explain the organization of human nervous system. You may be able to explain the structure and function of neuron, as well as explain the mechanism of nerve impulse transmission through the neuron. Okay, let's begin with the organization of nervous system. Now, the whole human nervous system is broadly classified into two different categories: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, in turn, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, it consists of all those nerves which either enter into the central nervous system or emerge out of the central nervous system. And in turn, again, the peripheral nervous system, it is divided into two subdivisions, that is somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. So under the somatic nervous system, all those nerves which either enter into the brain and the spinal cord are included, and also those nerves which emerge out of the brain and the spinal cord. Now, under the autonomic nervous system, there is a subdivision again. It is subdivided as the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So we can say that the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, they are antagonistic in nature. When we say antagonistic in nature, it means their function is just opposite to each other. For example, sympathetic nervous system, it prepares one's body for fight, whereas parasympathetic nervous system, it prepares the body after the fight is over. So we can say, in short, sympathetic nervous system, it burns energy, whereas parasympathetic nervous system, it conserves energy. So this is the whole division, the organization of the human nervous system. The human nervous system, it consists of many nerves. And in turn, each of these different categories of the human nervous system consist of a very, very important structural and functional unit, which is called as the neurons. Sometimes they are also called simply as the nerve cells. So, next thing we have to learn before we move on to the transmission of nerve impulse is the structure of neuron. So if we are asked to draw the structure of the neuron, then the structure will look something like this. So this is a generalized structure of a neuron. A neuron, it is divided into three different parts. The first part of the neuron is called as the cell body or the perikaryon. And the second part, it is called as the axon. or sometimes also referred to as the axon fiber. They are the same thing. And the third part, it consists of the axon endings or the axon terminal. Now, let us look at each part of the neuron one by one. So, first, let's start with the cell body. If you look at the cell body, you will find structures which are called as the dendrites. The function of these dendrite, it is to carry in the impulse from another neuron. Then Nissl granules are present. The function of Nissl granules, it provides food to the cell. Then nucleus, just like any other nucleus in any other cell, the function of the nucleus, it is to coordinate the activities of the cell. So similar to other cell, you will find all the other organelles present in a neuron, except for centrosome. Since centrosome is absent in the neuron, this is the reason why they are not able to divide once it has been formed. So these are the different parts present in the cell body. Now, if you look at the axon or the axon fiber, you will find
Schwann cells.
Present.
Schwann cells.
They undergo the process of phagocytosis and digest the nerve cells when they become old. Then you'll find the myelin sheath present. The function of the myelin sheath, it is to give protection to the nerve cell, as well as it also helps in insulating the nerve cell. The nodes of Ranvier has an advantage again. If the nodes of Ranvier are present in the neuron, it is believed that the conduction of the impulse becomes faster. So these are the different parts present in the axon fiber. Now let us look at the last part of the neuron, that is the axon terminal or the axon endings. So in the axon endings, towards the end of the axon ending, you will find it is slightly swollen in structure. These swollen structures, they are called as the synaptic knob. And after that, you will find the synapses or the synaptic cleft and the next neuron. So this is the generalized structure of a neuron. Before we start with the transmission of impulse, it's very, very important for us to understand what is nerve impulse. So the nerve impulse, it is the flow of electrical wave which move across the neuron. And this impulse, it is generated by stimuli. The stimuli can be either mechanical stimuli, it can be electrical or chemical. So all these stimuli, they are responsible for the generation of impulse. So how does the nerve impulse travel across the neuron? Generally, there are major steps. These three major steps, they are called as polarization, depolarization, repolarization, and
Refractory period.
each of these steps, we have to look at it very closely and understand what does all this mean. So polarization can also be called as the resting potential, and depolarization, it can also be called as action potential. So this is how the impulse travels across the neuron. So we are going to start with the first one, the polarization. Okay, now first let us take a look at this picture. The picture is showing us three different stages of the axon fiber. In the first figure A, you will find it is a resting potential, which means this particular nerve cell is undergoing the polarization stage. Then the second figure, B, it talks about both polarization as well as depolarization. And the third figure, C, it talks about all the three different steps: polarization, depolarization, and repolarization. Okay, now we are going to start with the first step, that is polarization. So in polarization, neuron is at resting stage, which means they are electrically charged but not able to conduct. The exoplasm during the polarization phase, the exoplasm, the fluid which is found inside the axon fiber, is negatively charged, whereas outside the cell membrane of the axon fiber, it is positively charged. Now, this is because there is more amount of positively charged ions outside the cell membrane. So because of this, outside the cell membrane, the polarity remains positively charged, and inside the axon fiber, it is negatively charged. Then, in the cell membrane, you'll also find gates or channels, which are called as the potassium gate or channel and sodium channels. The main function of these channels, it is to help in the movement of sodium and potassium ions in and out of the axon fiber. Okay, now during the resting stage, again one thing we have to remember, the amount of sodium ions which filters inside the exoplasm is very less compared to the amount of potassium ions which comes out of the exoplasm. So which means to say, less amount of sodium move in, while more amount of potassium, it moves out of the axon fiber. So this happens during the resting stage. Now, the second stage, it is depolarization. So during depolarization, what we have to understand is any stimulus which is beyond the threshold can initiate an impulse. So when we say threshold, it means
the minimum stimulus needed to achieve an action potential is called threshold stimulus.
so above this, if the stimulus can increase above this threshold, then it can cause an impulse. When such stimulus is applied in the resting neuron, it opens the sodium channel. Now, the permeability of sodium ions suddenly increase at the point of stimulus. So when an impulse comes along the nerve fiber, that time what happens? Suddenly the sodium gate, it opens and more infiltration of sodium ions from outside to inside takes place. So due to this, what happens again? Another change takes place, which is there will be change in the polarity. So now, outside the cell membrane, it becomes negatively charged, and inside, in the exoplasm, it becomes positively charged. And this state of the axon fiber, we call it as the depolarized state. And the process, it is called as depolarization. Then the third step is repolarization. The permeability to sodium ions decreases and the sodium channel starts to close. But at the same time, the potassium ions are pumped out from the exoplasm to outer parts of cell membrane until the original resting potential is restored. This process is known as repolarization. After repolarization, a short period called refractory period is reached, where sodium ions pumped out
from inside the exoplasm to the outside, and potassium ions from outside the cell to exoplasm through the sodium-potassium pump, which restores the original charges, that is, positive on the outside of the cell and negative on the inside of cell. During the refractory period, there won't be any generation of new action potential.
So, again, this indicates that there will be reversal of polarity. So outside the cell membrane, it becomes positively charged, and inside the cell, it becomes negatively charged. So this stage, it is called as the
refractory period.
So this indicates that the impulse has moved on to another region of the nerve cell. In short, we can say that the conduction of impulse is nothing but the movement of sodium ions in and out of the axon fiber. When the sodium ions, it moves inside, it means it has become depolarized. And when the potassium ions, when it moves out of the cell, it means that region has become repolarized. So this is how the impulse is being conducted along the nerve fiber. We have learned about the transmission of impulse along the nerve fiber. Now, I want to show you two videos. One on the conduction of nerve impulse in myelinated nerves, which means when there is presence of myelin sheath in the nerve cell. Then the other video is for the conduction of nerve impulse in non-myelinated nerves, in those nerves where myelin sheath is absent. So you have to watch both these two videos and then find out what is the difference between these two type of conduction of nerve impulse. And at the end, I'll be asking you some question based on it. So please watch the videos carefully.
Saltatory conduction. Conduction through myelinated nerve fiber. Due to the myelination of neurons, action potentials may only occur at the nodes of Ranvier. Myelin is made up of insulating cells, which means depolarization cannot occur in myelinated regions. Between these cells, however, there are gaps known as nodes of Ranvier which are unmyelinated. As depolarization cannot occur at the cells making up the myelin sheath, the wave of depolarization can only occur at the nodes of Ranvier. Thus, action potentials appear to jump from node to node when traveling down an axon, and this phenomenon is known as saltatory conduction, and it serves as a means of increasing the rate of propagation of an action potential. Not only does saltatory conduction increase the speed of impulse transmission by causing the depolarization process to jump from one node to the next, it also conserves energy for the axon as depolarization only occurs at the nodes and not along the whole length of the nerve fiber as in unmyelinated fibers. This causes up to 100 times less movement of ions that would otherwise be necessary, therefore conserving the energy required to re-establish the sodium and potassium concentration differences across the membranes following a series of action potentials being propagated along the fiber. Propagation of action potential in an unmyelinated axon. In unmyelinated axons, action potentials propagate as an interaction between passively spreading membrane depolarization and voltage-gated sodium channels. When one segment of cell membrane is depolarized enough to open its voltage-gated sodium channels, sodium enters the cell by facilitated diffusion. Once inside, positively charged sodium ions nudge adjacent ions down the axon by electrostatic repulsion and attract negative ions away from the adjacent membrane. As a result, a wave of positivity moves down the axon without any individual ion moving very far. Once the adjacent segment of membrane is depolarized, The voltage-gated sodium channels in that segment open, regenerating the cycle. The process repeats itself down the length of the axon with an action potential regenerated at each segment of membrane.
Okay, now let's talk about the difference between the conduction of nerve impulse in myelinated and non-myelinated nerve fibers. So what difference did you notice? Of course, the first difference you will say is the presence of myelin and absence of myelin sheath. Okay. So in myelinated nerve fiber, it contains myelin sheath. In non-myelinated, it does not have any myelin sheath. Then the second difference is consists of nodes of Ranvier in case of myelinated nerve fiber. Whereas in non-myelinated nerve fiber, there is no such node of Ranvier. Then the third point of difference can be, since transmission of impulse occur only at nodes, the speed of transmission is very fast. So in short, we can say, due to the presence of node of Ranvier in the myelinated nerve fiber, the conduction of impulse will be faster. Whereas in non-myelinated nerve fiber, the node of Ranvier, they are absent, so as a result, it is very slow. Whereas in myelinated nerve fiber, there is no such loss. And non-myelinated can lose impulse during conduction. So these are the main point of difference between the conduction of impulse in the myelinated nerve fiber and in the non-myelinated nerve fiber. So with this, we come to an end of our lesson today. Let's quickly go back to what we discussed today. So we talked about the organization of nervous system. So when we say the organization of the nervous system, it is mainly divided into two parts: the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is again divided into brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is further divided into somatic and autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Then we also learned about the mechanism of transmission of nerve impulse. So there are three major steps. They are polarization, depolarization, and repolarization. So this is how the conduction of nerve impulse takes place in the nerve fibers. Then we talked about the difference between the conduction of impulse through a myelinated nerve fiber and non-myelinated nerve fiber. Now, I have a few questions for you which you can explore further.
Finally, we have some takeaway questions for you. Question number 1. Why is nerve impulse transmission faster in myelinated nerve fiber than non-myelinated nerve fiber? Question number 2. Neuron is said to be structural and functional unit of nervous system. How? Question number 3. Yoga and meditation boost the strength of nerve cells. Explain.
So that is the end of our lesson today. Thank you for watching this lesson today. We'll meet again in the next lesson.